And welcome. This is Ralph from Hermetic Temple Radio, and you are listening to The Temple Flame. Good morning, or evening, or afternoon to everyone out there, depending on what time it is in your neck of the woods. This is Ralph from Hermetic Temple Radio, The Temple Flame, and other podcasts that we have going on here at Hermetic Temple Radio. And today I'm going to tackle the topic, how to connect with God. And of course, what I have to share is just something that I'm sharing from my own point of view and sharing what has worked for me over the past several years, especially the last, what has it been now, about 15 years that I've been on this new spiritual path and just loving it. But what I share here today, it's by no means is it going to be something that I think everybody should be doing. This is just something that worked for me, and it's in keeping with what we just heard in our previous broadcasts talking about the Kybalion. And the Kybalion is a great resource of spiritual and New Thought wisdom. It's got some nuggets of Hermeticism in there. It's just got a lot of wisdom that actually has been drawn from a lot of different world traditions, especially Eastern mysticism. And what I'm going to be sharing here is actually based on the Kybalion. And it's really is once you listen to the Kybalion, or any other New Thought type of literature, and you digest it, and you go deeply into it, you begin to understand that there are numerous practical applications and ramifications that you can take from this literature and actually apply it to your own life, either your own personal life, your own spiritual life, even your own business life, and become better situated, become more in tune with reality, higher reality, upper reality, as well as our material reality, and just become a calmer, more serene, and really more productive human being. And we spent a few weeks going through the Kybalion, using the LibriVox recordings, and listening to it from, the preface all the way up to the final chapter. And what I'm going to do now here is just tackle a few issues concerning practical applications of this wisdom that we can take out of books like the Kybalion, or what's another book that I played recently on Hermetic Temple Radio, The Science of Getting Rich, another New Thought type manuscript, and something that has an alternative view of spirituality, but has a practical view of spirituality that you can actually take and use and work with in your own business life. And you can apply this wisdom to really all kinds of life situations. So what we're going to focus on here for the remainder of the podcast is the question, how to connect with God. And I think in tackling this question, an excellent place to start is with your worldview. First of all, before trying to consider how to connect with God, take some time to explore your attitudes towards God, or the God of your understanding. Do you feel as if you are alienated from God at present? Do you feel separated from God and I think this is actually a very common feeling in our Western world and actually probably globally all around the world. Many, many different people either feel like they're separated from God, they don't really have a good relationship with God, or they just don't believe in any kind of a God at all. And of course, if you don't believe in any kind of a God at all, you're probably not going to be tuning into a podcast entitled How to Connect with God, unless maybe you think you need a good laugh or something. But if you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to guess that you already feel like you really do not have a good connection with God. You may feel alienated from God at present. You may have just up to this point not really considered a relationship with God in any way, or maybe you have and it just didn't work out. Maybe it got into the realm of traditional, church doctrine and dogma. A lot of people out there trying to present their own understanding of God as the one way, the absolute only way that you can find God and be assured of going to heaven in the afterlife. And let's just face it, those ways are not for everybody. I used to be in a tradition like that, and 15 years ago I said, okay, I've had enough, and I entered the ranks of those who are spiritual but not religious. And then I got into New Thought, Hermeticism, and the Kybalion, and just began to go through my own spiritual renaissance and awakening. So if your worldview right now is that you feel separated from God, then I think what might be helpful is to go through a process similar to what I went through about 15 years ago. And that is to just examine your own attitudes about God, about spirituality, and about the material world, and see if they are actually correct. Many times we base our lives on assumptions that turn out to be not exactly true, but they're true for us, and we live our life out according to those assumptions. And in the beginning, they might get us a certain part of the way, but in the end, they don't really take us where we need to go. And I think if you're feeling like you're stuck right now spiritually, then this may be a good time to just re-examine your spiritual attitudes about spirituality, the God of your understanding, and your world, your world view, how you see the world, and just challenge those views. Don't throw them away, don't throw them under the bus, but take a little bit of time to just look at those views and ask yourself, are they still working for me? Do I still see them as being accurate? Do they still speak to me in my present life experiences? And the reason I'm going into this is that most of the spiritual traditions around the world, at least the mainstream religious traditions, tend to teach that we are separate from God. And as individuals, we are separate from God. We are separate from one another. We are disconnected, from the world of spirit, from the world of nature, and from one another. And we're just little individuals that are, trapped out there floating in a sea of loneliness. And in order to overcome that feeling of cosmic isolation and material isolation, we have to join a certain religious tradition and play by their rules and connect with the God of their understanding and break through that cosmic loneliness and that isolation. But there are other religious traditions that, spiritual traditions. I'm not really going to call them religious. They are more spiritual than they are religious, but mystical traditions like the mystics of Christianity, the mystics of Judaism, the mystics of Sufism, and the numerous mystics of paganism. And these mystical traditions teach just the opposite. They teach that while we feel like we're isolated from the spiritual world, like while we feel like we are isolated and separated from God and from one another, we are actually deeply connected with the divine. And nothing can change that. Nothing will ever change that. And the feeling, the worldview that we are separated from the divine is actually what some of these traditions call, in Buddhism at least, the illusion of isolation, the illusion of separation. And Hinduism speaks to this too, and this concept has found its way into the mainstream religious traditions as well, where people are beginning to awaken. But the understanding that we are separate from God is actually an illusion. And the Sufi mystic Rumi had a great saying, actually a number of great sayings about our connection to the divine and our relationship with God. He was speaking at a time in a place where the vast majority of people felt like they were isolated, separated from God. And Rumi was teaching the people of that day and age, you are not separate from God. God is in fact closer to you than your own jugular vein. And in other teachings, people would be asking him about God, and he'd be, playing with his robes, and he was saying, Allah fills these robes. And that would have been kind of alarming to the people of that day. But actually, if we understand what we just heard in the Kybalion about that cosmology that the Kybalion teaches, all that makes perfect sense. How can God fill the robes of Rumi? How can the divine source be even closer to you than your own jugular vein? Well, let's unpack the opening chapters of the Kybalion and see if this doesn't make perfect sense in that light. The author of the Kybalion, in the beginning, goes into a rather lengthy talk about the universe being mental and the universe being energy, the mental and energetic nature of the cosmos, of material existence. And for us 21st century listeners, hearing something like the universe is mental, that doesn't really make a great deal of sense to us, unless, of course, you think we're talking about what we just lived through with 2020, and thinking that mental means, batshit crazy. You may think, well, yeah, after what we just gone through, I can see the whole world's gone mental, the universe is mental, and this is just craziness. But what they meant when they said the universe is mental, and that the universe is composed of energy, he was talking about something back in, when was the Kybalion written about? I think 1913, back when atomic energy was just being, looked at pretty seriously, and quantum mechanics was in its infancy, and all this nuclear research was just going on. And what he was saying back in 1913, and this wasn't something that he created by himself, the writer of the Kybalion. This information actually goes back a long, long ways through the mystical traditions of the East. And what they were saying is that everything in the material world is made out of energy. It is energetic in nature. And of course, when we exploded the first modern atom bombs back in the 1940s, I mean, we could see how matter was made of energy, and how that matter, how the energy in that matter could be liberated all at once and produce one heck of an effect. And back in 1913 and previously, these thinkers were talking about the universe being made out of energy. And the writer of the Kybalion goes a little bit further with it, though, because energy, that covers a wide spectrum. You can have electrical energy, you can have kinetic energy, you can have all kinds of other forms of energy. So the writer of the Kybalion asks the question, okay, assuming that there is a divine source that creates everything that we see and everything that we can't see, and that this is an intelligent divine source, and this intelligent divine source creates everything, and creates everything out of nothing, which is what a lot of mainstream religions teach, based on the opening chapters of the book of Genesis. You know, God created the heavens and the earth, and God creates just by speaking things into creation. Let there be light, and behold, there was light. Let there be dry land, and there was dry land. Let there be seas, and there were seas. You know, God seems to be creating just out of nothing, and just speaking things into creation. But now, what the writer of the Kybalion wants us to do is to take that creation story and take it even more deeply. If everything in the universe is made of energy, energy that is collapsed or held into a certain vibrational frequency where it appears as solid matter to our perception, but is actually just energy that's held into a certain vibratory pattern. And if God created the universe, or the divine source, or whatever you choose to call this entity, if this divine mind creates using energy, well then what kind of energy is it? Is it energy that emanates from the divine? Is it some sort of personal stuff that this entity takes from within his or herself and then creates the universe using that divine stuff? And the writer of the Kybalion, I won't go into it thoroughly, because there's a lot of great depth to this that I would not be able to do justice to at this time. But the writer of the Kybalion argues that the energy that God uses to create the universe with is thought energy. And similar to what we see in the book of Genesis, the creation story there, God thinks the universe into being, and he holds that thought, he, she, it, whatever you want to call the divine. It's really improper in my thinking to call the divine he or she or it, because, well, it is probably the the most accurate phrase we can use talking about the divine, because the divine encapsulates everything. You know, he-ness, she-ness, and itness. But let's not get bogged down into heavy philosophy right now. But the divine source thinks everything into being and fixes its thoughts and creation occurs just by being thought into being by this divine mind. And we can relate that to what we see in the book of Genesis, where God speaks, and it is so. And God literally speaks the universe into being. And we can ask ourselves the question, okay, what is speech and what is thought? Is the writer of the Kybalion and the writer of the book of Genesis, are they actually talking about the same thing using different words? And I believe that they are. Because what is speech? When we speak, what do? We take our innermost thoughts and we take them out into the world. We speak them out into the world. And I see speech as being active thought. You think something, and then you speak it, and it's out there into the world. And I think we can look at the creation story, that first creation story in the book of Genesis, and see God speaking the universe into being, and understand that in the term of God using thought energy to create with. And so, if this is true, what does this say about everything in the physical realm? If all matter is energy, and if all this energy somehow emanates from the divine source, something that you can call, by whatever name you wish. Some will call this Christ consciousness, some will call this Krishna, some will call this God, others Allah, others, a wide variety of terms we can use. But if this energy behind creation, and this energy that makes up all of creation, since we now know since the building and the detonation of the first atom bombs and all the atom bombs that have come ever since, that all materiality is actually made up of energy. And all this energy somehow emanates from the divine source. Then what does that say to our modern day feeling of being separate from God? If everything in the material world is made up of divine energy, be it thought energy or any other kind of energy, then how can we be separate from God or the divine? And you see, this is where that statement by Rumi that I opened up with begins to make perfect sense. God is closer to you than your jugular vein, because the energy that makes up your physical body emanated at one point in time from the divine source. And Rumi saying, these robes that I'm wearing, Allah fills these robes. Again, how is that possible? Well, the material robes, made up of energy that at one point in time emanated from the divine source. And we can say this about our physical bodies. We can say this about our clothes, as Rumi did. We can say this about everything that we see in nature. This is a point of contention with some mystics and occultists, but I come down on one side of the question. See, my wife went outside late last night and almost stepped in some fresh dog poop. And she called out to me. I was already in bed, and she said, I almost stepped in some dog poop. And I said, okay, I'll clean it up in the morning. And that reminds me I need to go out there and scoop that up now after this podcast. But even that pile of dog poop is made up of energy that at one point in time was part of the divine source. If we believe in our worldview, and not everybody will, but for those of us that do, that the divine source is the source of everything. Like the Kabbalion states that pretty clearly, that the all is the source of the all, and this divine source is the source of everything that we know, everything seen and unseen, and everything comes from this divine source. Then we can't look at anything and just dismiss it as blah or as ordinary, because even a steaming pile of dog poop can be seen as containing divine energy. And for those of you who compost, well, you know the power of manure in all forms, that we can compost that stuff and use it to create exceptionally fertile garden soil. And if you know how to mix it and just let it compost the right way, you can really create some beautiful crops using that stuff. So even the stuff that we tend to disregard and look down our nose at and just disregard as gross and awful, especially when we step in it, even that stuff enjoys a connection with the divine source. So, with all that being said, if the material world is made up of divine energy, and if we ourselves are made up of divine energy, and we feel like we are disconnected from God, then I think we have to carefully re-examine our attitudes and open our spiritual eyes so that we can see that far from being disconnected from God, God is a part of us. God is a part of all of nature. The beautiful stuff, the pretty stuff, the icky stuff, everything. And God is a part of everyone that you meet in your day-to-day life. So I realize this opens up a few cans of worms right off the bat, too. Because not everybody that we meet seems to be very God-like, do they? And not everything that we see in nature tends to be very God-like. If God is a kind and loving God, and divine energy makes up everything, you know, our souls, our bodies, the material universe, everything, then why do we see evil in the world? Why do we see misfortune in the world? Why would a tornado appear out of nowhere and destroy an entire town, including the church? If it's made up of God stuff, of divine energy. And the reason for that, I think we have to talk about consciousness, our conscious awareness, and how we choose to create using the divine energy that we are. And those that realize the deep connection between the source of all, the divine mind, and materiality, and themselves, they can take this divine energy and they can work consciously in harmony with the divine, and they can create out of love, and they can create out of joy, and they can create out of harmony with the divine mind. And when people create consciously using their God-given divine energies like that, you know, fully awake and aware of what they are doing, things of incredible beauty can be created. But now we live in a world where probably the vast majority of people believe in God, and the vast majority of people also believe that we are separate from God, then what do you have in society? You have a high level of belief, yes, but you also have a high level of people feeling ill at ease, not whole, separate from God. And when a person feels like they are separate from God, from the universe, from their fellow human beings, from nature, let's face it, that is a scary place to be. I've been there. I spent most of my adult life believing in God and believing I was separate from God, and I know that can feel like a scary place to be. And when somebody wrongs us, maybe rightly so or maybe unrightly so, we feel like we're under attack, and we feel like we're just this lonely individual out there in a cold, cruel, hostile universe trying to defend ourselves from God, the universe, and everything, and just get through this life as best we can. And that leads people to be creating or co-creating using their divine energy unconsciously. And they, instead of creating out of love, they tend to create out of fear or out of anger or out of jealousy. Some of the lower emotions, something other than love. Love is still in the mix, but fear, envy, jealousy, all those negative things that we tend to classify as negative anyway, they tend to dominate. And when people are creating using their divine energy, and they're doing it unconsciously, not in harmony with the divine source, then I believe that's where the evil that we see in the world arises from. People misusing their divine birthright. It's kind of like, you have a loaded gun, and in the hands of a trained marksman or a trained gun enthusiast, a loaded gun is actually not that dangerous because the person knows how to use it. They know how to put the safety on, they know how to clean it, they know how to take the bullets out, they know how to store it, they know a lot. They are consciously aware of how to handle a loaded gun. Take that same loaded gun, give it to a 3-year-old, disaster is probably going to ensue. And that's the way it is with modern-day human beings and the material world that we live in. Probably 90% of the folks out there are not awake yet. They are not aware of their divine connection. And they still have that divine energy, the ability to create and co-create, the ability to think thoughts and to bring things into creation, both on the mental plane and on the physical plane, through hard work and planning and building with their hands and things like that. But if people are operating out of their lower energies and they're feeling like they're separated from God, then they are going to be building, instead of beautiful things, they're going to be building some ugly things, some dangerous things, some nasty things. And that can spill over into the world of nature. If we feel like nature is a hostile, dangerous place, just like the rest of the universe, then this energy behind nature is going to treat us accordingly. And I'm positive that's where a lot of these, dangerous storms come from. Our fear is magnified when a large group of people are afraid. That energy of fear is radiating out into the universe, and we're speaking to the universe saying, hey, we need something to be afraid of. and the universe complies. But if we can focus our energy and keep it positive, and we can begin to consciously create positive things rather than negative things, then storms can be quieted. Remember the story of Jesus on the Sea of Galilee, the storm that threatened to sink their boat. And the disciples were fearful, and they woke Jesus up. Jesus was sleeping in the boat, and they woke Jesus up, and they said, "Hey, wake up. Don't you care that we are all about to die because of this terrible storm?" And of course, how does that story end? Jesus wakes up, maybe a little groggy, looks at his fearful disciples, speaks to the storm and says, "Peace, be still." And the storm is quieted. Because the love energy coming from the person of Jesus and the divine I am source that Jesus contained within him, that spiritual energy was able to speak to the energy of that storm. A storm created out of God energy, just like Jesus, just like everything else in this world, except in Jesus it was more fully realized, just as in Krishna, just as in numerous other enlightened teachers and mystics and sages. And Jesus was able to take that divine energy that he was and speak to the divine energy within that storm and turn it from a raging storm into just a peaceful kitty cat, for lack of a better comparison. So, evil is in the world because we have a bunch of people in the world that are creating evil. They are taking the divine energy that they have, their power to create and to co-create and procreate, and instead of using it out of love, they tend to use it out of fear. And as long as we tend to be more fear-based than love-based, then we can expect there to be a lot of evil in the world. Not saying that we shouldn't, take necessary precautions to defend ourselves and take care of ourselves and our loved ones, but we need to make sure that whatever we're doing in this life, whatever we see as being our duty to accomplish in this world, that we're focusing on doing that duty out of love, not out of fear, not out of hatred, and not out of indifference either. Indifference is an energy that most people think of as being, okay, it's not exactly as bad as hate, it's not exactly as good as love, it's just blah, it's in there. But that energy of indifference can be hijacked by others who know what they're doing and used for, bad ends or good ends. But we need to focus on doing what we need to do in this life and doing it out of love and building a conscious relationship with the God of our understanding. And that's where the practice of meditation comes in. I'm going to take a break right now. We've been talking about the need to generate positive energy. I'm going to play a song here by the Celtic Reggae Revolution called Positive. And then we'll be back for the second half of this podcast talking about the power of meditation in connecting with the God of our understanding.
Positive people. Positive with light. Happier.
got its pain. Take the rough with the smooth and get into the groove. Nothing ever was sure, so you ain't got nothing to lose. No, positive, that's the way I wanna live.
Positive change. Happier.
Positive, that's the way I wanna live.
Happier.
There ain't no problem, there's only solutions. There ain't no problem, no. There ain't no problem, there's only solutions. There ain't no problem, no. Positive, that's the way I wanna live.
Positive change. Happier.
Positive, that's the way I wanna live.
Happier. Positive love.
There ain't no problems, there's only solutions. There ain't no problems, no. There ain't no problems, there's only solutions. There ain't no problems, no.
Positive love.
Dance away these troubles.
Okay, so the first half of our podcast, we talked about the nature of reality, the nature of the universe, the energetic nature of the universe, and the understanding of the writer of the Kybalion that the universe is not only energetic, but it's mental, meaning that the type of energy that the universe is made from is thought energy. So, if that is true, how can we use this energy to better ourselves, to make a better world around us, to really start creating out of love rather than out of fear, and start doing something at a root level to take care of the evil in the world and change things for good? Well, one discipline that I got into a long time ago, my goodness, how long has it been? About 14, 15 years ago, I was a raging alcoholic. And I was also a very, very religious person. And up to that point, I would drink myself silly. I mean, we're talking about a case of beer every single day. And then the next morning, I'd wake up and I'd be asking Jesus for the strength to do what I had to do for that day to get through my life, and I was just a mess. And finally, my life had gotten so far out of control that I realized that just having faith in Jesus to get me through was just not going to do it. I had to change me at a basic root level. I had to quit doing this alcohol and making a mess of things and actively improve my life and get on a better path. So the only thing that I could actually think of, there's a few things I could think of, but one of them was getting involved with online AA, which worked for me, and that helped me get through my first 30 days of sobriety after, what was it, probably about 35 years of active alcoholism. So that was a miracle in itself, just getting involved in AA and getting 30 days sobriety, just working through that program. But then in AA, I happened upon a sponsor that dated back to the early Oxford group, a religious spiritual organization that developed, it pre-existed before AA, and AA sprang from the Oxford group. And this old guy, he was still alive back in those days, of course, and he shared with me a few things that the Oxford group did. And one thing he shared was the fact that daily meditation could help. And actually, daily meditation is a part of the 12 steps in Alcoholics Anonymous. And for some reason, that idea of practicing meditation on a daily basis, it spoke to me. And at that point in time, my nerves were shot physically, my body was a wreck, my mind was a wreck, and I was just open to anything that I thought might work. And so I asked my sponsor about meditation. And I told him what my plan was. He wanted to know what my plan was. And I thought, okay, what I need to do is I'll take an hour in the morning, because I was such a hardcore alcoholic. I would usually wake up about 4 in the morning, and when everybody else was asleep, and just use that as a couple hours of quality drinking time when other people were sleeping or maybe thinking about getting coffee if they were early risers. I was out there drinking my beer and watching TV for a couple of hours, and then about 6 o'clock I'd start drinking coffee and start trying to sober myself up to get through the rest of the day. And so I thought, okay, if I could get up a couple hours early to drink, why don't I get up a couple hours early and meditate and spend about 1 hour of meditation early in the morning? And then another part of my plan was at lunchtime. I could take an hour lunch, and I was in a position where I don't want to scandalize anybody, but I was a church pastor at this time too, raging alcoholic, church pastor, a busy church pastor, and was really working pretty hard, not only to serve the church but also to get myself straight. And I was able to schedule a 1 hour lunch break, and my plan was during that 1 hour lunch break to take about 30 minutes and spend that in meditation, and then have my lunch, and then get back to my church duties. And then afterwards, in the evening, I figured, okay, in the evening I could take another hour, maybe an hour and a half of time, and spend that in the practice of meditation, and just let that be my daily pattern. An hour of meditation in the morning, and then breakfast, a half hour of meditation about lunchtime, and then lunch, and then an hour and a half of meditation in the evening, and then do my spiritual reading, whatever else I needed to do, and then go to bed. And I told my sponsor what my plan was, and he said, you know what, what you've hit upon. And up to that point, we hadn't really talked very much about the Oxford group. And he said, this is really a part of what the early Oxford group did. They didn't call it meditation. They called it quiet time. But he told me, if you follow this program, I think you're going to make it. And so I did. That was all the encouragement I needed. And went into my meditation and did an hour of meditation in the morning, half hour at lunch, and then about an hour to an hour and a half in the evening. And that got me through my next 90 days of sobriety. And what I noticed happening within that first 90 days of meditating for 3 hours a day is that things began to fall into place. My troubled mind calmed significantly. My outlook improved, immensely. Even the people in the church began to notice a difference, and they wanted to know, what is it that you're doing differently? And a lot of them did not know about my past alcoholism. And so, we just kind of smiled and let it go at that. But the people around me could notice a definite change, and I could see a definite change in myself. And what began to happen in that first year of practicing meditation, combined with recovery from alcohol addiction, is that I just began to open my eyes to the point where I felt like, okay, I've got to make a few changes in my life. I no longer felt right about being a church pastor. I was feeling actually drawn to more of a universal spiritual mission. I didn't know at that time what to call it, but I knew I had to pursue it. So, meditation allowed me to repair my own broken life. It allowed me to repair some of the damage that alcoholism had done to my other relationships in this world. And what I noticed happening during my practice of meditation is that it helped me repair what was, up to that point, a very damaged relationship with the God of my understanding. And what also happened is that I saw how the God of my understanding began to grow, beyond what I had been taught to believe in seminary and in high school and in grade school. And I just began to adopt a far more universal approach to my view of life, the universe, and everything. And it's led me to make some major changes in my life, and not all those changes have been smooth. And for the last 15 years or so, I've really been struggling to put into words, this journey that I've been on. Here I am, a former Christian, a former Christian minister, former Catholic, and just in a whole new world right now, a much better world than the ones that I've left, and just feeling a lot closer to the God of my understanding and more at one with the universe, but really trying to find language to use to talk about these things. And you can see this in what we've been doing here at Hermetic Temple Radio. In the beginning, I discovered, I actually began a study of Buddhism. That spoke to me while I was in recovery from alcoholism. Did a deeper study of the Bible, and that began to speak to me and began to understand that, okay, I'm beginning to understand things differently than what I used to, and I could read the same Bible passages, and in light of my practice of meditation, and in light of coming into contact with the divine within me and the divine within nature, I just began to understand things much more differently than what I used to. And it's just led me on a path that I'm still trying to more adequately explain and find words to communicate with about this new path. But any more, I think Hermeticism, New Thought, and spirituality definitely does help to convey what I've been through in the last 15 years and where I'm coming at now. And what I try to do in these podcasts, especially on the Temple Flame and other spiritual podcasts that I will be doing in the future, is to keep things as non-sectarian as I possibly can, because one of the great awakenings to me as a spiritual being was coming to the understanding that the divine is a lot bigger than any one person or any one church organization can comprehend. And you can't take this divine being and put it in any box. And that tends to be what we want to do in religious life. We want to say, okay, here's this box, this is Buddhism. Here's this box, this is the Kabbalah. Here's this box, it is Judaism. Here's this box, this is Christianity. And if you're a Christian, you got to stay in this box and ignore all the other boxes. And it's just become my understanding that the divine does not play by those rules. Those are rules that we play by because we are limited, finite beings in this material reality. One quote that I love is that we are spiritual beings having a material experience in this material world. But while we are material beings, we tend to have a very narrow view of things. And we tend to understand things in terms of, okay, this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. And when you begin to understand and be able to see God in all things, and in all people, and in all nature, and within the universe and within the multiverse, when you come to the understanding that God is all, in all, that the divine source is everything and is the foundation for everything, and that all things proceed from this divine source, then that challenges a lot of our previous assumptions and views. I know it challenged mine. And my walk since having this awakening has been that, I have to become a lot more universal. I am a finite, material human being, approaching 60 now this year, getting those aches and pains and getting those additional health problems that come with aging. And I'm using, meditation and few other spiritual practices to help me manage and cope with those, things related to aging. But at the same time, I'm also a spiritual being. And as a spiritual being, I can use my divine energy from within and use it to communicate with the divine in other people and the divine in nature. And just through the practice of meditation, I have been able to awaken not only to the divine within me, but to the divine outside of me. And when we can begin to not only intellectually understand that the spiritual is the foundation for all materiality, but actually begin to feel that and communicate with that and understand that not from a perspective of faith, but from a perspective of just experience, of knowing this through our daily practice, then we understand that, certain attitudes have to change. Certain attitudes have to be adjusted. And as growing beings living in a material world, that's normal. That's to be expected. I like to compare it to a child. At the age of 3, 4, 5, you tell the child, hey, don't talk to strangers, don't run out into the street, look both ways before you cross the street. Always a good thing to do, no matter what your age. But imagine if that 5-year-old child, let's say, that was told those things at the age of 5, refused to grow from that state and tried going through the rest of his or her life never talking to strangers. How would that kid do in a career in sales or public relations or corporate relations or anything? And don't leave the house. Well, a lot of people doing that now with the COVID-19 pandemic. But imagine if everything that we knew at the age of 5, we didn't challenge. We never added to it. We just tried to keep that same attitude within us and just refused to grow. How would our life be? Our lives would be very, very limited. And most people, we grow. We continue to grow. What we knew at the age of 5 was good when we were 5, but as we age, we progress from there. We add new things. We add new information. We add new understandings and new attitudes. And that's just the way it is as we grow and as we continue to age and live throughout the days of our life. Spirituality, I see in the same light. What served me at the age of 5, it was great when I was 5. What served me at the age of 20 was great when I was 20. And, my God, probably allowed me to become a raging alcoholic and continue to be a raging alcoholic until about the age of 40-something, but that's beside the point. I had that whole understanding of cheap grace, You can sin all you want, and God will forgive you through the blood of Jesus. And come to think of it, that spiritual understanding, it worked for me somewhat, but it also crippled me. And it wasn't until about the age of, what was I, about 45, when I began to have this awakening. And I began to see the errors of my way. And I began to understand Jesus in a whole new light. Began to see the God of my understanding growing with me in a whole new light. As my understanding grew, the God of my understanding also grew, because I could see things more fully. I could see things more clearly. And for that, I have to thank a newfound life of sobriety that I've been living now for 14 years, going on 15 years, and the practice of daily meditation. And that has allowed me to awaken. So, to kind of recap here, if you want to work on connecting more deeply with God, or you're working on even just trying to get a fundamental, foundational connection with God going in your present spiritual life, first of all, consider what we said about the divine source, the nature of reality, the story of creation in the book of Genesis, and what we've spoken about concerning the Kybalion. But you can see this pretty clearly in just the book of Genesis too. That God creates everything out of nothing, creates using God power, God energy. Thought energy is what the Kybalion says. But God creates everything out of nothing using his own, her own, its own divine energy. And if that's true, then everything that we encounter in this physical life, even those icky, creepy, nasty-looking things, contain a certain amount of God energy in them. And if we can focus on just acknowledging this within our minds and saying, okay, if I believe in God and I believe that God is everywhere, then God can't be too far away. God is in this deck of cards I have in front of me right now. God is in my computer keyboard. God is in this cup of coffee. Pretty good cup of coffee, too. And so I just have to learn to see this more fully, become more conscious and more aware of this reality. And if you can comprehend that, then I think just getting into the practice of meditation is a very good way to open your eyes. And even if you can't develop the intellectual understanding that, even if you don't believe in God, if you just practice meditation and find some stillness in the world around you and just look deeply within, I think you will begin to see the reality that there is something higher than yourself, something that you can call, your higher self, Christ consciousness, Krishna consciousness, the I Am presence, the God of your understanding, whatever you're comfortable with. Terminologies don't really matter that much compared to the personal experience. But when you spend some time in meditation and you begin to encounter these things, and you open yourself to these things, and you begin to attain a deeper understanding of these things, then over the course of time, some people it may take years, other people it may take months. I know I've been on this journey now for about 15 years, and seems like I'm only just now getting a lot of this. But this will grow on you, and you will begin to come to an understanding that the divine is within you. You alone are not the divine. You alone are not God, but you are an aspect of God, a perfect manifestation of the divine, as you, living in the material world. And you can look upon other things within the material world and see the presence of the divine in those simple things. And then you can look at other people, begin to see the divine presence within those people. And yes, as human beings, we are flawed. We can be pretty royally screwed up, especially those people who have been suffering from addiction, alcoholism, things of that nature. We can get royally screwed up, but the divine presence is still within those people. And if you can make contact, bridge the distance between the divine within you and the divine within them, you can begin to have an impact, not just in your own life, but in the lives of others as well. Story of the life of Jesus illustrates this clearly. Story in the Bhagavad Gita about Krishna, also another very powerful story of God in human form, God consciousness. And as 21st century human beings, I firmly believe from my own experience, we have that God consciousness within us. We're just not fully awakened to it yet. It's not fully realized in the average person. But as we grow in understanding, we find ourselves on a path that is really seldom found by many people within the world. And it's a path that leads us to greater peace, greater tranquility, greater love, and greater success. However we define success, within our personal life, within our business life, within life in general. And so, if you want to learn how to connect with God, take some time to challenge your attitudes about spirituality and materiality. Do you see the spiritual world and the material world as being separated? and just the two just never meeting, like east is east and west is west, and neither the twain shall meet? Or can you see the spiritual world within the material world? Can you begin to come to an understanding that the material world is actually founded in the spiritual world? And then work on meditation. And while you're meditating, just focus on looking deeply within, listening within, listen to the insights that begin to crop up, and give it a good go. I mean, a lot of people think, okay, if I sit down quietly for 10 minutes a day, that's all I need. I would say give it about an hour a day at least. Don't think you have to start there, though. You can start at 10 minutes and then work your way up. But, if all you can do is 10 minutes a day, then start with 10 minutes, then work your way up to 15, and then work your way up to 20 minutes of meditation a day. And once you get up to about an hour, I think that's a good place to be. And be faithful to the practice. And after you've been meditating for a few months, I think you'll begin to come to an awareness of the deeper relationship that you enjoy with the divine of your understanding, and you'll be able to see a deeper connection between you, your fellow human beings, and the rest of the known universe. We're all connected. In this material world, yes, we're individuals. We seem to be isolated. We seem to be separated. But at a root spiritual level, we are all connected. No one is lost. All are within God. All are within the same divine source. As what is it? There is a quote that is coming into my mind. I think we'll just leave it at that. But yeah, everything flows from the divine. Everything returns to the divine. And that's the quote I was wanting to end with. So, hope you found some value in this podcast. Later on Hermetic Temple Radio, we'll be talking about some of the practical applications of this spiritual understanding. And I'll be preparing a presentation for our home-based business success podcast, focusing on the science of getting rich, the book by Wallace D. Wattles, and the metaphysics that Wallace D. Wattles was operating out of back in 1910 and previous, and how we can take those understandings and apply them not just to our spiritual life, but also to our personal life and our business lives to find greater success for ourselves and others using these highfalutin spiritual principles that we've just discussed. So, we will be talking to you later. Thanks for dropping by, and just God bless, and hope that your journey to find the God of your understanding and develop a closer connection with the God of your understanding. Wish you luck in that journey, because it is a very worthwhile journey to be on. And it is definitely, in our materialistic culture and world today, a road less traveled. So thanks again. We'll catch you later.